Welcome to the deep dive. If you're tuning in right now, I know exactly who you are.
You're someone who's intensely curious about the world.
Yeah, exactly. You are always looking for that next aha moment, but you really, really don't want to be buried under a mountain of information overload. You want the insight without the homework.
Right.
Well, today we have a mission that sounds almost like a joke, but I promise you it is deadly serious. We are looking at a text by the legendary thinker C.S. Lewis.
It's a profound, incredibly dense little book called The Abolition of Man.
Yeah, and our mission today is to explore how a seemingly innocent grammar lesson-like meant for middle school children could theoretically lead to the destruction of humanity itself.
I know, it sounds like a wild leap.
It really does. But this text covers ethics, philosophy, the future of human nature, and it all literally starts with the critique of a basic English textbook.
It really is a brilliant, almost subversive setup. Lewis provides a fascinating framework for understanding objective value here. He's looking at how modern society's obsession with what we call conquering nature might have a hidden, devastating cost.
Right.
And rather than starting with some, grandiose science fiction premise, he uses this simple, everyday textbook to show how ideas that seem totally harmless can rewrite the human operating system from the ground up.
Okay, let's unpack this. Lewis starts with a story about the famous poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
A great starting point.
Yeah, so Coleridge is standing at a majestic waterfall, and there are two tourists standing right there with him. One tourist looks at the waterfall and calls it sublime.
Okay.
The other tourist looks at it and calls it pretty. Now, Coleridge mentally endorses the first tourist, agreeing that the waterfall is indeed sublime, and he rejects the second tourist's comment with absolute disgust.
Right, because pretty is completely inadequate for a waterfall.
Exactly. So then, Lewis introduces us to this middle school English textbook. He conceals the real authors' names to be polite, so he just calls them Gaius and Titius.
And he refers to their book as the Green Book.
Right, the Green Book. In this textbook, Gaius and Titius tell the students that when the tourist said, "This is sublime," he wasn't actually making a remark about the waterfall at all.
He was only making a remark about his own feelings.
Exactly. He was basically just saying, "I have sublime feelings."
Mm-hmm.
And Lewis reads this and acts like the sky is falling. Why is he so alarmed by a clumsy grammar explanation?
What's fascinating here is the philosophical trap these authors have set, probably without even realizing it themselves.
Oh, they definitely didn't realize it.
Right. By teaching young students that statements of value like calling a waterfall sublime or calling a heroic act brave are just statements about their own emotional states, the textbook implicitly teaches that all values are subjective.
It's just your feelings.
Exactly. It tells the student that the universe is just empty and cold, and any meaning we see in it is just a projection of our own psychological state. Lewis actually calls this the pons asinorum of the whole subject.
Wait, pons asinorum? That sounds like a Harry Potter spell. What does that actually mean?
It's a Latin phrase that translates to the bridge of asses.
Oh.
It comes from early geometry, specifically Euclid. It refers to a critical test of understanding, a hurdle or a bridge that stubborn or slow-moving thinkers, the quote-unquote asses, refuse to cross.
So if you don't get this, you don't get anything.
Right. Lewis is saying that understanding this concept is the fundamental test of whether you grasp the nature of reality. Look at it this way. If you say a shoe fits, you aren't just telling us about your foot.
You're telling us something about the shoe, too.
Exactly. There's a relationship between the two. Value is about an object actually meriting a specific response. The waterfall merits feelings of awe and veneration. By saying it's just your feelings, the textbook severs the connection between the human mind and the reality of the world.
So they're teaching kids that the world has no objective value, only our subjective feelings about it.
Yeah.
And Lewis is so funny, but so sharp in his critique of this.
He really doesn't hold back.
No. He points out that if we teach kids that emotions aroused by things like a majestic waterfall, or by local history, or by stories of courage, are just irrational and contrary to reason, we do not end up creating rational, clear-headed adults.
We create what he calls the trousered ape.
The trousered ape, or the irredeemable urban blockhead. I love that phrase. This is the kind of person who looks at the vast, historic expanse of the Atlantic Ocean and can only conceive of it as millions of tons of cold salt water.
They've been completely robbed of their capacity to experience awe, which leads directly into how Lewis views human anatomy, philosophically speaking. This is crucial for understanding how we get from a grammar book to the destruction of humanity.
Walk us through that.
He breaks human nature structure down into three parts. You have the head, which is the intellect, logic, and reason. And you have the belly, which represents our animal appetites, our visceral urges, our biological drives. Now, classical philosophy says the head must rule the belly. Reason has to guide our appetites.
Makes sense.
But the head cannot rule the belly directly. A logical equation doesn't have the muscle to stop a powerful biological urge. It needs a liaison officer.
A middleman.
Right. It needs what Lewis calls the chest. The chest is the seat of magnanimity, of trained emotions, of stable sentiments. It is the part of us that feels righteous anger or deep loyalty or genuine awe. It's the emotional muscle that reason uses to keep the belly in check.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I am looking at this from the perspective of a modern teacher, I might say, well, I want my students to be skeptical. I want them to be purely rational so they don't fall for emotional propaganda.
Sure.
Isn't debunking emotion a good thing for critical thinking? Why does Lewis think this is so dangerous?
Because that is exactly what Gaius and Titius think they are doing. They think they are fortifying these kids against emotional manipulation. They think if we teach them to be purely rational, no one can manipulate them.
Right. Logic is a shield.
But Lewis argues that a hard heart is no infallible protection against a soft head. By starving the sensibilities of their pupils, they aren't making them smarter, they are just removing the chest. And famished nature will take its revenge.
Famished nature, meaning the belly.
Exactly. If you don't train the chest with just appropriate sentiments, the intellect eventually gets overwhelmed and the belly simply takes over. You don't get a society of hyper-rational philosophers. You get a society driven entirely by base appetites because the emotional bridge that connects thought to action has been destroyed.
And that brings up the paradox of modern society that Lewis points out, which I find so incredibly relevant today. We produce what he calls men without chests.
Yes.
But at the exact same time, we continue to clamor for qualities like drive, dynamism, and self-sacrifice. Think about how often you see that today, especially in the workplace.
Oh, all the time.
You sit in a boardroom and the message is, be a ruthless, purely data-driven machine. Care only about the quarterly metrics. Don't let sentimentality get in the way of cutting costs. But then, in the exact same breath, the company demands intense loyalty, deep passion for the brand, and dynamic creativity from its employees.
We remove the organ and demand the function. We laugh at honor, and then we are shocked to find traitors in our midst. To use Lewis's very memorable imagery, we castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful.
Wow.
We are constantly being asked to produce fruits from a tree that we have intentionally uprooted.
But if subjective feelings aren't enough, and we can't just rely on raw logic to generate things like loyalty or honor, what are we supposed to anchor our values to? When it comes to finding real objective values, where do we look?
Lewis introduces the concept he calls the Tao.
T-A-O.
Yes. He borrows the term from ancient Chinese philosophy, but he uses it as a shorthand for a much broader concept, traditional morality and natural law, or the first principles of practical reason.
Wait, first principles of practical reason is a huge mouthful. What does that actually look like in everyday life?
Think of them as the basic, undeniable truths of morality, similar to the way math has basic axioms. You don't have to prove that 2 + 2 = 4. It is a self-evident truth that forms the foundation for all other math.
Right.
The Tao is the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others are really false, regarding the kind of universe we live in and the kind of creatures we are. It is the baseline reality that things like courage, honesty, and caring for the weak are objectively good, not just socially convenient.
And to back this up, Lewis includes a massive appendix in this text. It is entirely dedicated to proving that the Tao is not simply one culture's idea or one specific religion's dogma.
It's universal.
Utterly universal. He pulls quotes from ancient Egyptian texts like the Confession of the Righteous Soul, ancient Jewish laws from Exodus and Leviticus, Babylonian incantation tablets, Old Norse poems like the Havamal, Hindu texts, Chinese analects, Roman philosophers like Cicero.
And across all these completely disconnected civilizations, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, you find the exact same universal laws.
Duties to parents, laws of general beneficence, justice, honesty, and mercy.
It is an overarching web of objective value that humanity has always recognized. It isn't something we invented. It is something we discovered about the nature of reality, just like we discovered gravity.
But then we meet a character Lewis calls the innovator.
Ah.
The innovator is the person who looks at the Tao and says, let's scrap all this old sentimental baggage. Let's invent a new, basic, realistic system of values. And usually the innovator tries to base these new values on things like utility or biological instinct.
They'll say something like, we don't need ancient poetry about honor, we just need science. We must preserve the human species. That's our new, purely rational biological value.
The problem is, Lewis expertly dismantles this innovator's argument by showing the logical wall they crash into.
There is an old rule in philosophy, you cannot get an ought out of an is.
Meaning what exactly? Just because something is a fact doesn't mean it's a moral imperative.
Precisely. You cannot take a factual premise like this action will preserve society and magically turn it into an imperative, like you ought to sacrifice your own life to preserve society.
Unless you already believe society ought to be preserved.
Exactly. But where did you get that value? You borrowed it from the Tao. Science and biology can tell you how to preserve the species, but they cannot tell you why you should bother doing it.
Right.
Furthermore, if the innovator tries to rely purely on instinct, they run into another wall. Our instincts are constantly at war with each other.
Give me an example of that instinct war.
Imagine a fire breaks out in a building. You hear someone crying for help. You have an instinct to preserve the species, which tells you to run in and help.
Okay.
But you also have a much stronger, more immediate instinct for self-preservation, which tells you to run away and save yourself. If you are just following instinct, which one do you choose?
You can't just flip a coin?
No, you need a standard completely outside of the instincts to judge which instinct you ought to obey in any given moment. Lewis compares it to sheet music. Your instincts are the keys on a piano. There are no good keys or bad keys.
But the Tao is the sheet music that tells you which key to strike at which time to make a melody.
That's it, exactly.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you can't invent a new value out of thin air. It's like trying to invent a new primary color.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Lewis argues that any new ideology that tries to replace the Tao is actually just a fragment of the Tao itself, arbitrarily wrenched from its context and swollen to madness.
It's cherry picking.
Very much so. You can modify the Tao from within, much like a great poet can modify their mother tongue while still respecting the spirit of the language, but you cannot alter it from without. If you hold a pistol to the head of the Tao, you destroy all values, including the very ones you are trying to use as your justification.
So the rebellion of these new ideologies is just the rebellion of the branches against the tree. If you chop down the tree, the branches die too.
Perfectly said.
And if you reject the Tao, you don't get a better, more modern system of values. You just get a void where value used to be. Which brings us to the leap that Lewis makes, and here's where it gets really interesting.
The turning point.
Yeah, this is where the escalation from a grammar book to a sci-fi dystopia finally clicks into place. Lewis asks a very simple question. What does the phrase man's conquest of nature actually mean? We hear it all the time. Applied science, airplanes, the wireless radio, modern medicine. We are conquering nature. We are the masters of our domain.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Lewis points out a sobering reality. Man as a collective species doesn't actually possess this power. Every time man conquers nature, it is actually a power exercised by some men over other men, with nature acting as the instrument.
Let's take that a step further. What does that mean in practice?
Think about the airplane or the radio. These are incredible powers, but they can be withheld by those who own the production, or they can be used as weapons bombs or propaganda against other men.
It's controlled by a few.
Right. Even with something like contraception, it is a power wielded by the currently living generation to dictate the existence or non-existence of future generations. So man's power is actually the power of a few over the many, and that power extends through time.
So the generations that come later are actually weaker.
Yes, because their environment, their society, and even their biology might be preordained by the planners of the past.
So the logical conclusion, the ultimate conquest, is when man gains full scientific control over human nature itself. Lewis talks about eugenics, prenatal conditioning, and applied psychology. This is where a new group emerges in his theory, the conditioners.
The conditioners.
These are the people armed with the power of an omnicompetent state and irresistible scientific technique. And their goal is to decide exactly what kind of humans they want to produce in the future.
And this is where the danger of stepping outside the Tao becomes an existential threat to humanity. In the past, teachers and parents initiated the young into the Tao. It was like old birds teaching young birds to fly.
Passing down the sheet music.
Exactly. The teachers themselves were subject to the exact same moral law they were passing down. They didn't invent the concept of justice, they served it, and they taught their students to serve it. But the conditioners step completely outside the Tao.
Because they think it's just subjective feelings.
Right. They see all values as mere natural phenomena that they can manufacture. They decide what kind of artificial conscience to produce in the next generation. But here is the terrifying paradox. Because they have abandoned objective value, they have no rational motive to guide their decisions.
This is the part that blows my mind. If the conditioners don't believe in the Tao, they don't believe in concepts like duty or the good of humanity or justice. Because going back to the Green Book from the beginning, they believe those are just subjective feelings.
Just psychological states.
Exactly, psychological states they can manipulate. So every motive they try to act on becomes a logical fallacy.
Specifically, the fallacy of petitio principii, or begging the question. Now, in casual conversation, people use begging the question to mean raising the question, but in logic it means circular reasoning.
Assuming the truth of the conclusion you were trying to prove.
Yes, the conditioners can't say, we will condition people to be good because it is our duty. Why? Because they are the ones who are currently manufacturing the definition of good and duty for the human race.
You can't use a ruler to measure itself.
That's a great analogy.
So if they have no objective values and they can't rely on duty or honor, what is left to motivate the conditioners?
Only their own irrational impulses, their visceral likes and dislikes, their fleeting pleasures. Maybe it's a chance psychological event, or the raw emotional strength of a desire. In other words, they are motivated entirely by nature in its rawest, most irrational form.
The belly.
The belly.
So nature rules the conditioners through their unchecked impulses, and the conditioners rule all of humanity through their scientific technique. Man's final conquest of nature turns out to be nature's total conquest of man.
It is deeply chilling.
We thought we were beating nature back, but she was just luring us in. And Lewis makes this brilliant comparison between modern science and magic to explain how we got to this point.
It is a profound comparison. He says that serious magic and applied science are actually twins. They were born in the same era, roughly the 16th and 17th centuries, from the exact same impulse.
Which is what?
Well, for the wise men of old, the goal was to conform the soul to reality through knowledge, discipline, and virtue. But for both the magician and the modern applied scientist, the goal is to subdue reality to the wishes of men.
It's the magician's bargain. You give up your soul to get power in return. In order to conquer nature, we reduce it to mere quantity. We strip away its qualitative properties.
Yeah.
We stop looking at a forest as a beautiful living ecosystem that merits awe, and we start looking at it merely as raw timber to be manipulated.
Yes, and as long as we do that to minerals and vegetables, we might say the gain in technological power outweighs the loss.
But the final step of the magician's bargain is when we turn that exact same analytical reducing lens onto ourselves.
We reduce our own species, our own souls, to the level of mere nature. We treat our own judgments of value, our own love, our own morality as raw material to be scientifically manipulated. And as Lewis points out, if you treat yourself as raw material you will be.
He tells this great joke to illustrate the absurdity of where this leads. It's about an Irishman who finds a stove that reduces his fuel bill by half. So the Irishman logically concludes that if he just buys 2 of these stoves, he will require no fuel at all.
A classic logical error.
It's the fallacy of taking a process to a logical extreme that destroys the very premise you started with. You cannot keep explaining away things forever. Eventually, you explain away explanation itself.
Right.
If you see through traditional values and you see through human emotion and you see through everything that makes life meaningful, eventually you are just left looking at a void. As Lewis perfectly puts it, a wholly transparent world is an invisible world. To see through everything is the same as not to see.
This raises an important question, and it synthesizes the entire journey we've just been on. What started as a critique of Gaius and Titius and their middle school English book reveals the fundamental threat to human nature.
It all connects.
It really does. If we accept the premise that value is purely subjective, that the waterfall isn't sublime, it's just your feelings, and if we treat ourselves and our minds as raw material to be manipulated for efficiency or progress, we will inevitably become the slaves of our own irrational appetites.
Because the chest is gone.
Exactly. The conditioners won't be liberating us with their technology. They will simply be imposing their own arbitrary whims on a post-human world.
So what is the takeaway for you, the listener, in all of this? How do we avoid becoming men without chests? It lies in the immense value of what Lewis calls ordinate affections.
And just to be clear on what that means, ordinate affections are feelings that are proportionate and appropriate to the object you are experiencing. It is having the right emotional response to reality.
Exactly. It's the idea that you should train yourself not just to think critically, but to feel the appropriate emotions toward the things in life that truly merit them. To feel awe at a waterfall, to feel reverence for the past, to feel anger at genuine injustice.
Aligning your chest with your head.
So you aren't ruled by your belly. The defense against a conditioned post-human future isn't less emotion. It's correct emotion, grounded in the objective reality of the Tao.
The solution isn't to retreat from science or progress, but to ensure that our scientific progress is guided by a chest, a firm grounding in objective human values that we refuse to explain away.
We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Lewis claims that serious magic and applied science are twins, born from the same desire to subdue reality to human wishes, sometimes at the cost of our own humanity.
A powerful warning.
As you look at the modern technologies you use every single day, the algorithms that endlessly curate your social media feeds, deciding what you should feel angry or happy about, the smart devices that manage your schedule and optimize your life. Ask yourself this: how much of your reality are you subduing right now for the sake of convenience? And at what point do you cross the line from being the master of that technology to becoming the raw material being conditioned by it?
A vital question for our time.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We will see you next time.